Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and my channel is Discerning What is True. Today is the 17th day of February 2023, and the topic I'm going to talk about today is Mr. Greer's book, America's Engineer Decline, Chapter 6. Uh, you know, most people just want to ignore these type of things, but it's really right in your face now. I mean, it's obvious of how this country has been destroyed. Um, Even with the COVID deal that happened 2 years ago, actually now 3 years ago, um, it's amazing how this country's been changed in that timeline. It really is. So this is for those who have ears to hear and eyes to see. And the chapter is chapter 6. And what can we do? Energetic and creative individuals and government interest groups and corporations are quietly assembling a global arrangements. For the most part, they work outside of legislature and parliaments and are screened from the glare of the media in order to find common interests, shape a consensus, and persuade those with power to change. This is part of the Hegelian dialectic. Even he gives it what he call they shape the consensus, they shape it, and persuade those with power to change. That's a Harvard Business School professor, George C. Lodge, Lodge. Here's another quote. The internationalists have always been hard at work in quiet places making plans for a more perfect global community. In the end, the internationalists have always dominated national policy. Even so, they haven't bragged about their globe building for fear of reawakening the other half of the American psyche, our berserker nativists. And so they have always done it in the most out of the way places and with little ado. This is a quote in Newsweek, International Edition, that is, managing editor Michael Hirsch, Hirsh, The Death of a Founding Myth. And here's another quote from Edwin Burke. When bad men combine, the good must associate, else they will fall one by one, unpitied sacrifice in a contemptible struggle. Is our nation decline foreordained and inevitable? Must the United States of America replay the sad history of previous republics that have descended into empires, impoverishment, and ruin? Do impersonal, irresistible historical trends dictate the eclipse of our nation, its cultural, its institutions, and its traditions by a new global order? The answer to all these questions is a resounding no. Even without deliberate, covertly organized efforts of power-seeking individuals, every free society can succumb to the corruption that is an unavoidable aspect of the falling human condition. And it's certainly true that many of our problems and challenges have little, if anything, to do with the machinery of the shadowy collective entity referred to in these pages as the power elite. Nonetheless, we have seen that the elite have carefully and deliberately undertaken to undermine the American middle class and subvert our national independence. These developments are not a result of blind and personal historical forces or of innocent errors, honest mistakes, or lapse in judgment on the part of our leaders. Neither is our decline largely the unfortunate outcome in the long running ideology conflict between liberty and collectivism. Now, you do know what a collectivist is, don't you? A collectivist is what took place in the Soviet Union. But it goes further back, folks. It goes all the way back to the Bible. You see, the people of God in the Bible, in the Old Testament, speaks of, were collectivists. They have actually ruined many empires or uh, civilizations, I should say, is a better word instead of empire, because empire comes across as a negative, which is not. They destroyed Egypt. They've destroyed Babylon. They destroyed Greece. They've destroyed the Persian Empire. They've destroyed the Roman Empire. All from within. All from within each time. There's nothing more important in my thinking is this. Individual rights are the most important rights of any human being can have. Anything else is less than perfect. And what I mean by that is simply is that if you don't have individual rights as a person, as an individual, you don't have any rights at all. And the UN has been saying these words, and I keep pushing this, and I'll preach it, keep talking, I should say, not preach it. But anyway, um, human rights is not individual rights, folks. It's a misnomer. Human rights is collectivism. You see, the United Nations is that world government, folks. You follow me? So if you do not have any individual rights as a person, say, and I don't even like to use the word human being, because then you don't have any freedom. Because it then will be simply the human rights will be simply it's going back. And this is why I don't like to use the word democracies. Many people use that word and think it's a great word, but democracy, the way I understand it, is this mobocracy. It's the 50% plus one vote that dominates the minority. And that's democracies, folks. It's based upon mob rule, meaning the mob being 50% plus one vote, or a little over 50% of voting people. So collectivism has been going on for a long, long time. There's such a people on this planet that believe that they are the people of God. But most of it's just made up, you see. In realistic terms, they believe that they are the people of God, they only, and that they should rule over all of mankind. That's their, that states that, and that's what their God is. They believe their God, whoever that God is that they're supposed to rule over all people, and they are the people of God. It's also referred to in Revelations, the synagogue of Satan. So there's a little tidbit. What group has a synagogue, folks? Is that clear? Is that clear to you? Simply put, our prosperity, liberty, and national independence are being stolen from us by those who seek total power over the entire globe. What we confront is a deliberate plot to harmonize our standard of living with that of other nations and integrate the United States into a central directed global economy ruled by entrenched, unaccountable transnational power elite, illustrated by the foregoing quotes and the evidence provided in the previous chapters. This campaign is often shrouded by secrecy and always involved a deliberate effort to deceive the public. In other words, it is by strict, specific definition, a conspiracy. So why conspiracy matters? You have been taught that anyone who thinks in conspiracy matters has got some type of problem. You're wrong. You're very wrong. You've been played. Contemporary Americans are somewhat schizo on the subject of conspiracy. The concept is practically ubiquitous in our literature and entertainment. Primetime television, for instance, is awash in police procedures and similar crime dramas built on conspiracy plots. The same is true of movies, novels, and other diversions. When it comes to fiction, the American public has no problem accepting the concept of conspiracy public opinion. Surveys also suggest that most Americans perceive our government to be controlled by a power elite, the state of disunion. A nationwide survey conducted by the Congressional Institute found that 80% of those that were polled, agree that our country is run by a closed network of special interests, public officials, and the media, and that the government itself is pretty much run by a few big interests looking out for themselves. 64% considered our ruling elite as amoral, indifferent to the public concerns, and devoted exclusively to pursuing its own interests and agendas. Yet only 24%, less than one quarter of Americans surveyed were willing to say that this powerful, corrupt, well-entrenched elite is involved in a conspiracy. You see the oxymoron of this whole statement. They just said all this here, but then when asked the question, they don't believe it, perhaps. Perhaps it should be considered unpredictable then that the 60% of the respondents concluded that people like me don't have any say about what the government does. From the fatalistic perspective, government corruption is simply an unalterable reality of life, as fixed and immutable as the laws of gravity. There is an important sobering lesson here. A conspiracy cannot be defeated unless it is recognized and opposed as such. If Americans are seriously concerned about building a better life for themselves and their children, and they understand that our own government is controlled by corrupt, conniving men determined to enrich themselves at the expense of our liberty and prosperity, then it follows that those schemers and their designs must be exposed and opposed and defeated. And this inescapable requires identifying our enemy as a conspirator. Think of it this way. How many large-scale crimes are committed by lone individuals? Lone nuts? Think about it. While solitary thugs are responsible for much of the violence that plagues society, the most serious damage is perpetrated by criminal syndicates, whether they're small-scale street gangs, drug smuggling rings, or vast underground empires. All of these criminal enterprises are by strict definition conspiracies, and unless they are investigated and prosecuted as such, they can't be defeated. Consider the case of La Cosa Nostra, COSA NOSTRA, the multi-generational international criminal syndicate, more commonly known as the Mafia. As late as the early to mid-1980s, some respectable opinions still maintained that the Mafia was a figment of paranoia imagination. There does not exist, nor has there ever existed, a organized secret hierarchy criminal society called Mafia. This is pontificated by Italian scholar Pino, P-I-N-O, All'Acia in 1983. Yet, in 1985, Virgil Peterson, a presidential consultant on organized crime and former head of Chicago's Crime Commission, dismissed as a myth the idea that America Cosa Nostra is controlled by a mystical and somewhat romantic Sicilian mafia, which with secret initiatives rights. As defectors from the mafia began to come forward, they were greeted with scorn and derision, or worse, from pseudo-sophisticates in powerful academia, law enforcement, and political posts. In the early 1950s, as the Senate investigated mafia activities, Harvard sociologist Daniel Bell dismissed the inquiry, claiming that it had been misled by his own hearsay. 20 years later, mafia defector Leonardo Vitale, V-I-T-A-L-E, testified against several of the conspiracy's highest leaders, only to have an Italian jury dismiss his testimony and consign him to a lunatic asylum for a decade. But we better come up to the realization here that people who have braved and tell you the truth and you could not believe it. This is what is called cognitive dissonance. People can't handle it. They cannot believe how bad it is. So they just push it down. They pretend it doesn't happen, but it is happening. And it's in your face now. It is in your lives now, folks. It's in your life every day. Someone's trying to get your attention, folks. Someone's trying to get your attention, and you continue to look the other way. Shortly after Vitale was released from his unjust imprisonment, he was gunned down in the streets of Palermo. Kind of solves that problem, doesn't it? This guy was brave enough to speak and tell the truth. That is Leonardo Vitale. And yet the jury dismissed the whole testimony. Kind of wonders what people out here, a few people who are still trying to speak, and they're barking as loud as they can to get your attention to see what's going on. It's in your fucking face, folks. It's there. And while you continue to put your head in the sand, it continues to get worse. So you are the problem. The chief obstacle in dealing with the mafia, complained Senator Estes Cafaria, a resolute enemy of their syndicate, was that for most Americans, the idea of such a vast, long-lived international conspiracy was so fantastic that most Americans have difficulty in believing it really exists. Yeah, it's been here for a long time, folks. This public disbelief was abetted by the obstinate refusal of public officials to recognize the existence of mafia conspiracy and to fight it as such. No friends of the friends in the mafia since could have served it so well as these upright, obstinate disbelievers, commented scholar Claire, C-L-A-I-R-E, Sterling. Their refusal to see the plain truth was worse than misleading. It effectively blocked any assault on the mafia as an organized criminal body for over a century. This began to change, though, in the 1970s and 80s when law enforcement finally began to fight the mafia as an identified conspiracy. Once the secrecy and cultivated disbelief that has shielded the mafia conspiracy was dispelled, the cabal itself was decimated within 2 decades. And I assume that's something to do with the Italian mafia. Corrupt government is also a racket. The fate of the mafia conspiracy has more relevance to our present circumstance than merely illustrating how respectable opinion can be wrong. When governments become corrupt, they take on the characteristic of criminal syndicates. As St. Augustine observed more than a millennium and a half ago in his treatise of the City of God, justice being taken away, what are kingdoms but vast robbers? Emancipated from the rule of law and stripped of its humanitarian pretenses, government simply becomes the engine of the plunder. Oppression, and ultimately mass murder. We're going to go through a book called Death by Government by R.J. Rummy. That's the correct way of speaking it. People have no idea how much murder has taken place last century. You need to know it. In brief, corrupt governments becomes conspiracy against the liberties, property, and even the lives of their subjects. Interesting to use that word subjects, because that's what we are, slaves. The American founders, men of learning, accomplished courage and vision, understood these sobering, realistic realities. Their heroic campaign to win the independence from Great Britain and later to build a constitutional republic began with the understanding that they were battling a determined conspiracy seeking to use government power to reduce the American colonists to slavery. In his Pulitzer Prize-winning study of the ideology foundation of American independence, Harvard historian Bernard Bailyn, B-A-I-L-Y-N, noted that the fear of comprehensive conspiracy against liberty throughout the English-speaking world, a conspiracy believed to have been nourished in corruption and in which it was felt oppression in America was only the most immediate visible part, laid at the heart of the revolutionary movement. Leaders of the drive for independence saw about them, with increasingly clarity, not merely mistaken or even evil policies violating the principles upon which American freedom rests, but nothing less than a deliberate assault launched surreptitiously by plotters against liberty. British philosopher John Locke was among those whose wisdom inspired our founders. In his second treatise on government, Locke presented a useful distinction between commonplace government inefficiency and corruption on the one hand, and the malevolent design of conspirators bent on destroying liberty on the other. Great mistakes in the ruling party, many wrong and inconvenient laws, and all the slips of human frailty will be borne by the people without mutiny or murmur. But a long train of abuses, prevarications, and artifice, all tending the same way, make the design visible to the people, and they cannot but feel what they lie under and see whether they are going. It's not to be wondered that they should then rouse themselves and endeavor to put the rule into some hands which may secure to them the ends for which government was at first erected. At the familiar aphorism put it, Even a dumb dog can distinguish between being stumbled over and being kicked. One key to discerning conspiracy, according to Locke, is consistency, a series of policies and decisions that have the common tendency to enslave and impoverish a government's subjects. That's us. These trends suggest that design, secretly arrived at, pursued through deception, in brief, a conspiracy. The founders, applying this wisdom to the circumstances, recognized that the enemy they confront was a conspiracy against their liberties. That's what it is, folks. That's what it's all about. Writing on behalf of the pro-revolutionary cause in 1774, John Adams declared that the conspiracy against the liberties of the colonies were first regularly formed and began to be executed in 1763 or 64. In an essay published that same year, Thomas Jefferson endorsed Adams' perception and pointed out that the British policy towards the colonies displayed a conspiratory pattern. While single acts of tyranny may be ascribed to accidental opinion of a day, Jefferson advised, a series of oppressions began as a distinguished period and pursued unaudibly through every change of ministry too plainly prove a deliberate and systematic plan of reducing us to slavery. And after initially seeking to vindicate their ancient rights as Englishmen, as subjects of the British Crown, the founders eventually came to realize that they could only do so as citizens of a free and independent state. The Declaration of Independence, invoking Locke's anti-conspiratory language, has asserted that separation from Great Britain was made necessary because of a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, events a design to reduce us under absolute despotism. American independence was thus a triumph of the anti-conspiracy worldview, as in our Constitution. Dr. Balin, a liberal academia who holds no brief for conspiracy theories, was compelled by his research to conclude that the American Constitution is the final and climatic expression of the ideology of the American Revolution, an ideology that is described as anti-conspiratorial. American founders would have no difficulty recognizing that there is a conspiracy behind the unfolding campaign to eradicate the middle class and absorb our nation into a central-rooted global regime. Yet they will not have to rely on circumstantial evidence to form such a conclusion. Controlling the alternates, just as they were key mafia insiders who blew the whistle that criminal syndicate former insiders have exposed the workings of the power elite. The most important of these figures is the late Georgetown University political scientist Carroll Quigley, academia recognized as a mentor by, of all people, Bill Clinton, who gives his 1992 nomination acceptance speech to launch Quigley before a world audience. In his monumental study, Tragedy and Hope, Quigley offers a relatively brief but priceless examination of the role in modern history played by the power elite, a self-perpetrating international clique bent on dominating the world. Having examined that Kabbalah's intimate documents, Quigley approved of his objectives, taking issues only with his determination to avoid publicity in stealthy pursuit of global hegemony. I know of the operations of this network. This is a quote from him. Because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. I have no aversions to it or to the most of its aims, and have for much of my life been close to it and to many of its instruments. In general, my chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown. The network objectives is nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This system was to be controlled in a feudalistic fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret meetings and conferences. The apex of this system was to be a private bank owned and controlled by the world's central banks, which were themselves private corporations. Each central bank sought to dominate its government by its ability to control treasury loans, to manipulate foreign exchanges, to influence the levels of economic activity in the country, and to influence cooperative politicians by subsequently economic rewards in the business world. According to Thomas Jefferson's indictment, the conspiracy against the colonies made itself known through a series of oppressions begun as a distinguished period and pursued unalterably through every change of ministry. The effort to create the central control economy described by Quigley has displayed similar consistency. That program, which would require reversing our national independence and reducing our middle class to penniless, has continued unchecked for at least a century and has been pursued through every change of administration, whether Republican or Democrat. This isn't a case of globalists, big government Democrats versus conservative national Republicans. Rather, it's the operation of a powerful entrenched elite that effectively controls the leadership of both major parties. Towards the end of his voluminous study, Professor Quigley, who remembered shared the power elite's objectives, offers some telling observations about what he considered to be the proper role of partisan politics. Disdaining the idea that the two parties should represent opposed ideas and policies, Quigley insisted that the two parties should be almost identical, so that the American people can throw the rascals out of any election without leading to any profound or extensive shifts in policy. That's right, folks. When the electoral grows weary of one of the establishing parties, Quigley continues it should be able to replace it every 4 years if necessary by the other party, which will still pursue with new vigor approximately the same basic policies. Correct. That's all it's about, folks. Well, they get up and tell you all these rosy little things and speak about such and tell you how to go. You think great, and you go right back to sleep. You do. If you don't like what I say, don't worry about it. I speak truth, but I'm not interested in you approving me or not. That's not what this is about. This is about truth, folks. The policy alluded to by Quigley, namely ancestry, entanglements in foreign conflicts, and the relentless growth of socialism at home, constitutes the much heralded bipartisan consensus. It's more accurately described as a pact between the parasites and the plunderers, that is, the government and its favored constituents, against the interests of the productive class. Like Quigley, the late social critic Christopher Lasch, and I have a book by him. We'll do that book. I'll show it right quick here for you. The Culture of Narcissism, American Life in the Age of Diminishing Expectations, Christopher Lasch. We're going to read this book because it's well worth it. Have ceased to think of themselves as Americans in any important sense, implicated in America's destiny for better or for worse. As a result, they are deeply indifferent to the prospect of America's decline. In fact, the elite hardly have revived middle America as a term which has come to symbolize everything that stands in the way of progress: patriotism, religious devotion, strong family commitments, and conventional morality. Next section, let's march. Like the mafia, the power elite commands tremendous wealth and power, yet its most formidable weapon remains deception. That's what it's about, folks. You're going to have to open up your eyes and be a big boy here, a big girl. Unlike the mafia, its single greatest vulnerability is exposure. Thus, its designs can still be defeated if sufficient number of Americans can be informed, organized, and mobilized. If, to paraphrase John Locke, we can rouse ourselves and endeavor to put the rule into such hands which may secure, hands for which government was at first erected. Most Americans, serene in the misplaced confidence that they live in the best of all possible worlds, don't realize three very important things. First, that the immediate ancestors say their parents and grandparents enjoyed a higher standard of living than they do. Measure in terms of what they owned, what they owed, and what they could transmit to their heirs. Second, that while the United States of America remained a middle-class nation, it is tragically unlikely that it will remain so a generation from now if it continues on its present course. This book, again, was written early 2000s, so it's been 20-some years from that. Third, that this reflects the labors of a conspiratorial elite that can and must be defeated through organized, principled action. What would happen if a sufficient number of Americans came to understand that these three unsettled but vital truths? We can see at one possible outcome in history of our struggle for independence. Our founders faced a predicament similar to ours. They had an extensive heritage of liberty, but confronted the daunting task of defeating a conspiracy against their liberties that had at its disposal the wealth and power of the world, most formerly empire. Yet our founders, through courageous, principled, organized effort, and with God's help, prevailed in their struggle for independence and succeeded in creating our constitutional republic. Because of their heroic labors, our task, unnerving though it may be, is much simpler. We have a constitutional framework that can still work if Americans can be taught to use it correctly. Long before it became fashionable, the society urged our nation to withdraw from the United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, and other foreign entanglements. What he's speaking about is the John Birch Society. To prevent creation of the so-called free trade areas of America and the EU-style regional governments. Creating the FTAA, Free Trade Areas of America. They're already in states, folks. I know there's one in South Carolina. It's perhaps the highest immediate priority of the criminal conspiracy that seeks to impoverish and enslave us. Defeating the FTAA would thus be the highest priority of those who cherish what his architects seek to destroy. This is a struggle that we can win if sufficient numbers of Americans are informed and mobilized in time. While defeating this particular agency is vital, it is not sufficient. We must also end our nation's entanglement in needless foreign conflicts, as well as our involvement in the United Nations and its affiliates. We must stop foreign aid, including the subsidized export of our manufacturing capacity abroad. We must restore control over our nation's border. Just as important, our central government has to be trimmed back to proper constitutional size, so that our businesses are no longer being suffocated beneath regulations and bled dry by taxes. The organized effort to destroy our civilization requires an organized opposition when confronting a combination of bad men bent on total power. Good people who love liberty must combine their efforts as well. It's immensely important for us to understand who our enemy is, a winning strategy to defeat it, and the necessary organization framework to do that. Thank you. That's the end of that particular chapter, and we'll be going into what he's got what I call the appendix 1. And I'll look at that in a little bit. We'll take a little break here. So thank you for being here. Hope that it is actually educational to you. And, it's the same thing with the people who just simply, what do those words mean in the national anthem, the home of the brave? Are we home of the brave, folks? It doesn't look like it, does it? I don't see any bravery out here. Do you see any people brave hardly out here? Look around here in this country and see. Most people are still flocking to, they're like last weekend, they're involved in the big Super Bowl, and yet they're not really, they don't want to see what's going on. The Roman Empire was to give them bread and give them a circus. That's what they did. The circus was all sporting events. We have so much sporting events in this country, it is unreal. And I like sports, you see, but it's gone. It's gone. It's unbelievably wow. Everything's broadcast now on TV, so a lot of times you don't even have to go there. You see. But anyway, I'm diatribing here, so I'll stop here. Appreciate you being here. Thank you, and if you like it, pass it on. Again, I'll say this very clearly. If you have ears to hear and eyes to see, you can see this. If not, there's not much hope, not only for you, but even for your own country. Thank you. Have a good day.